Good morning, all. So nice to be here again. I'm comparing to yesterday. How many people in the audience were here yesterday? Let me take a quick look. Okay, almost all of you. That's nice. As Kevin said, you probably weren't at the event that closed at 4 a.m. last night. But, nice to have that in our community. Unlike Kevin, I'm going to start to say things, I'm going to re-say things that I said yesterday in a slightly different format. Excuse me, I'm Neal Goldsmith. I'm a psychologist here in New York City. I have a psychotherapy practice, and I'm the author of the book, Psychedelic Healing, The Promise of Entheogens. Another word for psychedelics, I probably don't need to explain that in this audience. The promise of entheogens for psychotherapy and spiritual development. And to me, actually, I don't really distinguish so much between those two. I call it sometimes psycho-spiritual development. I think of it as a maturation process, rather than as a healing of pathology, a medical process. That's not what neurosis, quote unquote, is about. And so that all comes from my own personal psychedelic experiences. And that's why I'm here, in a way, really, because of my interest, my personal and my professional, and then my obligation in society to try to, help bring this, these wonderful substances to wider availability. So I wanted to also thank, this is the 10th year, so we have a 10th year theme that I'm going to tell you about in a second. But I want to thank, after having done this for 10 years, we have certain folks, some of you, I'm not sure, it's a smaller crowd than yesterday morning, but yesterday morning when I asked the question, how many people, has there anybody here who's been here all 10 years? Because one person came up to me at the reception Friday who'd been here for all 10 years. So I want to ask that question here. Anyone here who's been here for all 10? There's one. There's a couple of people here who've been here. So that's wonderful. And how many people are here for the first time this year, again? So many, most, if not all, but most. So again, applause for a different reason, but welcome, welcome. And one of the things that Kevin and I were talking about last night was not the impact of the work and the research and the people who come up here to speak about their work, but just the impact of the sociology of having this conference for so many years and how it's built over the years and grown in terms of number of people, and that a community has coalesced. And some of you, I'm sure, feel that feeling of in October you come to Horizons and see people you've seen for a long, and of course, standing here, being in front of people, every single one of you loves psychedelics or respects it or is interested in it. And so that's obviously a very rare occurrence as well, so to do that over and over again. But so certain people have been involved with us for all those years. The people at MAPS, for example, Rick Doblin has spoken here several times. This is not a MAPS conference. Some people think it's a MAPS conference, but it's not. But we love MAPS, and they are brothers, and we're associated with those guys and help out as much as possible. I think Kevin and I are actually going to go out to California for their psychedelic science conference in April to co-host one of their science tracks, which should be sweet. So we participate like they do with us, but we couldn't have done this without the people who contributed, like MAPS and the research projects like down in South Carolina, the Mythhoppers. Michael Mythhopper couldn't make it because of the storm yesterday. The NYU project, the Johns Hopkins project, UCLA, and the others. It's not just that we have a stage here and people come up like acts and give their thing. They are participants in the Horizons process, really, over time. That's why you're here. You're not really here for Kevin and me. You're here because of the community we've built, which includes the presenters, and it's special. Not all conferences are like that. So I want to tip my hat to the folks at MAPS and also at the different projects as well, like I mentioned. And now the MAPS fundraiser last night, some of you might have been there at Giancarlo and Stephanie Canavesio's house in Soho. Every year they host this fundraiser. They open their home and they do this every year. And I want to thank them particularly for their generosity and their kindness. And again, it comes from the open-hearted involvement in what we're all doing, the same mission we all have, whether you're a researcher or a student or just a tripper for that matter. I want to also thank especially Bia Labate. I'm not sure if Bia's here yet, but Bia is an expert in ayahuasca and a scholar and one of the leading voices in the field. And when we started, when ayahuasca became more prominent, we needed help. I didn't really know that much about ayahuasca, or at least it was not my expertise. And Bia, as a friend to Horizons, started giving us names of people who we could bring in. And eventually, at a certain point, she curated the Sunday that we called Ayahuasca Sunday. And so she's been a friend of the conference, and I really wanted to recognize that and have you all know that a lot of our ayahuasca strength really comes through Bia, and she'll be speaking, of course, this afternoon. I want to thank some of our hosts. Alexandre Tanos has hosted people. You know, we have our speakers come in. We don't put them up in hotels. And we pay their airfare. We don't pay for hotels, but we do broker a way to have people from the community to host one of these wonderful scholars that we bring in. And people love it, and so I send out an email, and we get certain hosts. And people, Alexandre Tanis has hosted people every single year. He was going to host Michael this year, Michael Mithofer, so he lost out because Michael couldn't come. It's a benefit. The hosts love it. Maxie Cohn, a wonderful artist, hosts every year practically, and she hosted Alicia Danforth this year. Jeff Gus from NYU and James Lawler hosted Ken Tupper. Jim Duty came through. We had a special request because we had an additional speaker this year, and I put out, you know, we really are in need. And Tim came through with this spectacular apartment that Jessica Nielsen is staying in. So again, it's all the community, and I wanted to just make note of that. Speaking of the community, you know, there's 65 volunteers now in Horizons, because we've grown each year. Now we're over 650 seats sold per day. And it's a big operation. So we have 65 volunteers, about 10 or 12 management people involved. I want to reach out to, you know, just call out to Grace Yang and Teresa Mershon, who did the website, the beautiful graphics. We have vendors here who've been here all 10 years practically. Billy Cochran, for example, who's food and that sort of thing. And then Anna Leah Jacobson, who's our photographer for many, many years. And this year we have Adamus and Tim and many, many, many more. So this is, I know, boring for you in a way, but it's super important to communicate the feeling of community that's happened, and so much participation, not just me on stage or the speakers on stage. Okay, so now we have this theme. This is 10 years. So we took this as an opportunity, really, as an excuse to be reflective about our progress. And so the theme is 10 years prior, 10 years hence. And so we've asked people to talk about their progress, what they've done, accomplished over the past 10 years, not just this current year, and then speculate about the future of psychedelics and psychedelics research, psychedelics in our society. And who is better equipped than a brilliant database scholar who's had experience with psychedelics to predict the future? So we've asked them to talk about that. They haven't exactly predicted the future, as you can imagine. They're sober scientists, but they have talked about what to expect in the coming 10. And I thought of this metaphor of a baby, that 10 years ago, this part of psychedelics research was a baby. It could have been smothered in its cradle, for that matter. But now the baby is 10 years old. Like a 10-year-old, you know, riding its bike and leaving the house, the 10-year-old venture of psychedelics is pretty much has its own 2 feet. But it's not adult yet. It's still under restriction. The substances are scheduled. So it's like a 10-year-old who's still under the supervision of its parents. But another 10 years from now, the baby is 20 years old. And that's an adult, that's not a baby anymore. But it's a beginning baby. So if you think about it, they got the driver's license, they can vote, sort of like psychedelic drugs would be rescheduled, they say, in the next 5 or 10 years or so. So here you have this 20-year-old adult, starting out as fully licensed and legal, but inexperienced still. So, and you don't just start at the age of 20 planning for your life. You started earlier on. And this is the next 10 years, since we've had so much success with the research. The next 10 years is about planning for rescheduling, planning for when psychedelics are re-implemented, re-adopted into society. Do we have centers? Do we have solo use? We experiment with delivery systems like that. What is the least cost to society? What about diversion of the drugs to illegal market? Or what about charlatans or megalomaniacs like Charlie Manson? What about psychological distress we have to manage? We can't just put these things on the drugstore shelf next to aspirin. And then what about non-medical use in divinity schools, for example? And I need to point out, it's not really a sure thing that this will continue. What if there's a political conservative backlash? What if there's an economic downturn and there's no money for the research anymore? Well, you know, what if there's a disaster in the research and somebody dies, subject this problem? All of these things can still impede our progress. So with that caveat, however, I'm ready for the slides now. Thank you. I want to take a few minutes to talk about long-term implications. Now that's almost like hilarious, right? A few minutes to talk about long-term implications, impossible. And I'm going to speed through this at record time because we're even a little behind in our schedule. But I did want to share it with you. And if you'd like, please get in touch with me and I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint. So these are some of the issues that face the researchers in the field today. Why are they helpful in psychotherapy? And 3, can they repair malfunction, go back and do remedial work? Can they speed up natural development? Can they put you into places that you've never been before, that you would never have been without a psychedelic? Why do they give pain relief? Some of the research shows that. What about lasting change, or is it ephemeral? Or what about self-experimentation, which is important for research because you can't give it to a lab animal, and if they stare at a wall for 8 hours, you don't really know what happened. And what about then training a new generation of therapists and researchers with active doses of the material, which is what's happening. And what about, is it real spirituality or is it just sort of nature mysticism? And so are these substances just a chemical or a sacrament? So, assuming the research goes well and everything's accepted, how do we reschedule it? How regulated should it become? Is it next to the aspirin? How will psychedelics be integrated into society? And what's the implication of that for the world? How can we create the safest and most effective environments? How do we best educate the public? And what about the rest of the drug policy movement, which doesn't really focus, drug policy reform, which doesn't focus on psychedelics all that much? Now here's medical safety. This is a grade, the top one is marijuana. They say the lethal dose is, greater than 1,000. If you smoke 1,000 joints plus, maybe you'll die. But right down below that is LSD, again, 1,000. There's no lethal dose of LSD. There are contraindications, of course, for the phenethylamines, but with the tryptamines like LSD and psilocybin, there's not. Here's another chart. Upper right-hand corner, heroin. This is not, it's medical danger, but it's practical danger in terms, these are emergency room admission data. So heroin's the most dangerous. Opposite corner, LSD and psilocybin. This is addictive potential by lethality. Of course, the psychedelic renaissance we've been hearing about. But the purpose of the substances is, this is our friend Alex Gray, his wonderful paintings, is transformation. And in a way, this is a beautiful analogy for, and of course, the middle one, the chrysalis, is glowing because something very magical is happening there as the body of the caterpillar becomes completely dissolved. It's a mini death and rebirth that we go through stages. In fact, the stages of life are facilitated in tribal settings through rites of passage ceremonies that are made possible by the loosening effect of the visionary plants. So this idea of transcendence and death and rebirth brings into play, well, what are we talking about here? We have a mind and a body? Isn't it really just one energetic thing? And so I like to think of psychology not as psychology. The root of the word psychology is psyche. Psyche doesn't mean mind, like psychedelics are translated as mind manifesting. But psyche is the Greek word for soul. Soul manifesting. Spell it with a small s to indicate it's not supernatural or religious. Just the deepest part of us. As a psychologist, that's how I view it. But psycheology is a word I made up to draw attention to that very fact that we need to return psychology to the study of the soul, not to pharmaceuticals, not to even analysis as the primary focus, but to realigning with the ground of our being. And that's truly the healing process. So, the future implications. We need new policies. We need systematic drug design. Ways to integrate the psychedelic experience like Catherine and Ingmar were talking about yesterday. And we have ways to change policy. There are methods. And if it's there, we have to put our shoulder to the wheel. And I encourage all of you to get involved with MAPS or the Drug Policy Alliance, for example, and try to change things. Because we have enormous positive data here. The psychedelic medicine, is it spiritual or not? Is it mind or neurotransmitters? These are all big picture questions. But I think of spirituality as merely the sort of end point of human development, synonymous really with wisdom when you take out the supernatural aspects. So, but it's always the power of the organism, and that's what psychedelics in the medical context do to get you in touch with your healing part. The analogy was given by Michael, actually, of a wound where you have a cut. And the physician doesn't really heal. He can remove the debris. He can make sure it's not infected. He can stitch it up to bring the two parts close together. But the doctor does no healing whatsoever. The healing part, the knitting together part, is done purely by the body. And that's what we tap into psychologically when we go to the ground of our being. So it's that process. You ask people, what's the effect of psychedelics? They say, oh, it makes you wacky, you see different colors, you get tense and anxious. But that's not the action of psychedelics. That's the reaction to the action of psychedelics. The action of psychedelics is simply to illuminate. Like a miner's helmet with a light lamp on the forehead, whatever you look at is illuminated. So that's the real true action of psychedelics, and that's their greatest benefit to society. So with that as a groundwork, as a little bit for what we're going to do today, thank you.